Hello, everyone, and welcome to the College Orientation Summer Series of webinars. My name is Samuel Schallenberger, and I am from College Programming and Orientation. I serve as our Assistant Director for Orientation and Student Development, and I'll be serving as your moderator for the webinar today. Today, we are focusing on an overview of the core presented by our College Academic Advising and Transfer Office, and we will review UChicago's distinctive core curriculum, providing all students a challenging and common academic foundation before they begin course specifics to their field of study. Our first half of the webinar is dedicated to a presentation, and the remaining time is left open for Q&A. And because we are in a webinar mode, we will be accepting questions through our Q&A portal, which you can find at the bottom of your screens. So if you would like to submit questions through there, we also have some of your questions that were submitted when you registered. So we'll be tackling all of those that we can get to as soon as the presentation wraps up. And so I'm going to get right to it and pass it over to Steph Mitos, who is our Interim Assistant Dean of Students and Assistant Director of the College Academic Advising and Transfer Office. Steph?
Well, thank you so much, Samuel. We're so happy for all of you to join us here today. I'm joined by my academic advising colleagues, Elise LaRose and Shayna Bamer, who will help me present today. This presentation will feature several esteemed faculty members with deep connections to the core curriculum, who will be able to offer their insights on what makes UChicago core so unique. We will first hear a thoughtful discussion on the overarching aims of the core between Professors Emily Lynn Osborn, the Deputy Dean of the College for Research and Teaching Innovations, and Jennifer Spruill, the Social Sciences Core Sequence Co-Chair for Power, Identity, and Resistance, followed by a focus on the Social Sciences Core and Humanities sequences with Professors Daragh, the Social Sciences Core Sequence Co-Chair for Classics of Social and Political Thought, and Eric Slauter, our Deputy Dean of the Humanities Division. Today's presentation will provide an introduction to the distinctive liberal arts education that UChicago offers. We will give a conceptual and philosophical overview of the core curriculum as a totality and dive into the various disciplines which compose it. And finally, we will review the registration process for selecting your humanities sequence. During the presentation, I will moderate the chat function to aggregate and respond to your questions. At the end of the webinar, we will have reserved time to respond out loud to your most commonly asked questions. We ask that you keep the questions to the topic of the webinar. If you have other questions you would like to ask the advising office, please email us at collegeadvising@uchicago.edu following the presentation. If time remains at the end, we will invite other questions at that time. Otherwise, please email our office and our inquiries, and we'll get to you as soon as we can. This is an exciting opportunity for you to engage directly with UChicago faculty for the first time, and we invite your intellectual curiosity in posing exciting questions to them. Lastly, before getting started, I'd like to share our goals for our time together today. Those are to observe the distinct features of a UChicago liberal arts education, to begin to identify the values and goals inspiring the different core sequences, to recognize the different fields of study among core requirements, to consider how studying different modes of thought will prepare you to engage critically and creatively, and finally, to gain an understanding for how to rank and request your humanities sequences effectively. Now I'm excited to turn over the presentation to Elise LaRose.
Thank you, Steph. Again, let me also say welcome to all of you. We're excited and delighted that you're joining us today. We look forward to meeting you in the fall in person. We know that many of you chose UChicago for our unique curricular experience. As an academic advisor who has worked in the college for more than 20 years, I'm passionate about the general education curriculum, what we affectionately call here the core. Shortly, we will review each requirement with you, but to start us off, we'd like to present a short clip from Professors Emily Lynn Osborn and Jennifer Spruill, two faculty members and leaders in the core.
Greetings. Welcome to the University of Chicago, to you, the class of 2028. My name is Professor Emily Lynn Osborn. I'm a faculty member in the Department of History, and I'm also a deputy dean here in the college. I'm really delighted to talk with you here today about the core, and I'm doing so with my dear friend and colleague, Professor Jennifer Spruill.
Hi, I'm Professor Spruill. I'm the co-chair of the Power Identity Resistance Social Science course sequence, and I also work with Professor Osborn as the senior advisor to the core. Welcome to the University of Chicago.
You are about to embark on a singular educational experience here at the University of Chicago, and in large part, that will be because of the classes and the sequences that you take in the core. We are going to talk to you a little about the core and what makes it distinctive and, we think, transformational. I often like to think about the core by thinking about a pen, like this pen here. An engineer might look at this pen and say, well, how could I make a better pen? A poet might look at this pen and think of it simply as a tool, right? But I think that the core invites us to think about the pen in all sorts of different ways and in different dimensions. So for example, when you look at this pen, you might think about the history of writing, how writing has gone in the past 1,000 years, say, from something that is esoteric to something that is quite commonplace. Lots of people know how to write. Writing and pens are everywhere. How many of you have received a free pen? But then you can also open up questions about where the pen comes from.
In my sequence, we would look at the pen and we might think about what are the social relations through which the pen was produced, which might lead us to think about, okay, what are the relations between labor and capital?
And how do those relations work and bring this pen into being from different parts of the world? Someone who studied physics or the physical sciences in the core might consider the properties of this pen as its physical properties, its gravitational pull. But also you could look at the metal. This pen seems to have metal on it. So how does metal, what is the history of metal? How is metal made? What are the properties of different kinds of metal that you might find on a pen?
And an artist might think about different properties. So an artist might think about, well, what sorts of qualities and weights of line would this pen allow me to use to express a really complex social critique?
Basically, this is just one example of how the core opens up different lines of inquiry and different perspectives on the world and our place in the world. It makes, in a sense, the familiar unfamiliar.
And really it points to the idea that really at the heart of the core is inquiry. And then it prompts students to think about what sorts of knowledges, what skills are needed to answer questions that they're posing, what sorts of analytic methods and lines of reasoning are needed to respond to the questions that we're posing from different perspectives. And it also helps students respond to these questions in convincing ways.
It's a forum for students to share their ideas, debate their ideas, and to then develop new ideas.
So the core is also an opportunity for students to explore interests and discover interests that they may not know that they have.
I have a student who recently graduated, who I worked very closely with, and she took a calculus class and discovered that she really liked quantitative analysis. And so she ended up double majoring in econ and balancing that with her major in philosophy. And that's not uncommon, that students take a class in the core that opens up some new avenue for them that they end up majoring in.
But it's also important to note that the core is not a distribution requirement that we see at many liberal arts colleges. It looks like it. It looks like, oh, we just want you to take a little science, a little social science, maybe some literature, some math and art. And it's really not the case. The core is designed to really cultivate scholarly practice and habits of mind, like critical thinking, interpretation, argumentation, especially in written form. And these priorities are really built into the pedagogy of the core itself. So we don't expect that students will acquire these skills by, sort of incidentally by taking a discipline-based class. They're really part of the aim of the core itself. And really, it's also preparation for much more than students study at the University of Chicago. Dean Hale talks about when she talks with alum, that they say they find a much deeper appreciation of the Corps, not when they just graduate and get their first job, but further along when they start advancing in their career and they realize the value of having a holistic understanding of the world, an understanding of sort of all ways that elements of the world work together, and also of working together with other people that we also see as part of the core pedagogy, the discussion classes and that kind of collaboration. And that's really when former students start to appreciate the core.
I just went to a presentation last week about AI and technology and how many jobs have been lost in the tech sector in the last year as the result of AI. I think it's a lesson in not being able to predict the future.
Yeah.
We don't know what the future holds, but what we do know is that it's really useful and important for people to be able to think and to communicate and to analyze.
Employers will be looking for students who are really able to engage in the world and understand the world.
Professor Spruill, if you had some advice for an undergraduate embarking on their career here at the University of Chicago about the core, what would you tell them?
I think use it to explore beyond their intended major. Take it early, right? So make sure, take your core requirements early. You might discover something that you don't realize that you're interested in. You might discover relationships with other fields that you had no idea would be part of your intended study, and make the most of it.
Welcome again to the University of Chicago. We are thrilled that you are here.
Okay, so let's briefly review what is required of you. Keep in mind that the core offers multiple ways of fulfilling each requirement with course sequences designed around themes and propelled by questions akin to those you just heard Professors Osborn and Spruill discuss. The core curriculum requires 15 courses total across 7 fields. Students must also fulfill the language competency requirement. These 15 courses are 100 units each, totaling 1,500 units. Some students may have AP or IB credits that will fulfill some of the core requirements. Having these credits may impact how many core classes you will take on campus. In summary, all students will complete the following: 2 quarters of a humanities sequence, 1 arts core approved to fulfill the core, 2 quarters of a civilization studies sequence, 3 quarters of one of our social science sequences, 2 biological sciences approved to pair together, 2 physical sciences approved to pair together, and at least 1 math approved to fulfill the core. This totals 1,300 units. The remaining 200 units are flexible depending on your interests and your plans. As the chart suggests, 1 additional course must be in math, physical science, or biological sciences, and 1 additional course must be among humanities, arts, or civilization studies. Let's now take a brief look at each of these.
Awesome. So our first requirement is not factored into the 15 classes. It is the language competence in the college are required to possess an understanding, and more than 1 culture and to demonstrate competence in a language other than English. Depending on your background, you may or may not be required to take language classes at UChicago. If not required, we always encourage students to pursue language learning and language proficiency, as they represent functional, real-world skills that broaden and deepen all student learning at the university. 3 common ways to complete this requirement include receiving credit for an AP or IB score, taking language courses at UChicago depending on placement, or by having gone to school outside the US where you were taught in a language other than English. Even if you went to an American school or English-speaking school, if you are from a non-English speaking country, you could petition to waive the requirement. You will talk with your academic advisor about your language skills and interests to determine the appropriate plan for meeting this requirement. Our next field is mathematics. The math core requirement broadly is intended to give you space to learn to solve problems. Problem solving is a skill you'll be asked to use frequently at UChicago, even outside of your math-based courses. In these courses, you will explore methods for learning about the world using imperfect or partial data. All incoming students must take the math placement exam over the summer. This exam is open now and is due on the 20th of June. It is recommended to take math in your first quarter, along with the humanities, and many, but not all, students will fulfill this requirement with calculus. If you choose to take calculus, credit for 2 quarters is required. If you are not considering a major that requires calculus, you may prefer to only take 1 course for the math requirement. These options include statistics, computer science, or non-calculus math courses. Oh, at least you're muted.
Next up is the physical sciences core requirement. For students interested in STEM fields, majors such as chemistry, physics, biology, math, computer science, geophysical, and environmental sciences, or for those who want to prepare for a career in health fields, you will complete either a general physics or a general chemistry sequence. We refer to these as the physical sciences for those pursuing science majors or pre-health prep. Please note that all students who are interested in majoring in any science or math field must take the chemistry placement exam this summer, and the same would be true if you're preparing for a health career, but not planning to major in a science. Non-STEM students, those who do not plan to pursue a major in any science or math field, are also eligible or welcome to take traditional chemistry or physics, but not obliged to do so. Instead, you can choose to take a physical science sequence for non-scientists. There are various sequences designed for non-science majors. They address areas of physics, chemistry, astronomy, or the earth sciences, what we broadly refer to as geophysical sciences. These courses will have the course code PHSC rather than chem or phys, chemistry or physics. You might hear some of us refer to these as Phi-Sci or PHSC courses for non-science majors. These courses include sequences carrying titles such as Physics for Future Presidents, Stars, Galaxies, Global Warming, Earth as a Planet, or the Chemistry of Food and Cooking. All students are required to complete 2 physical science courses for the core, whether they do physics, chemistry, or one of these courses I've just described. Additionally, all students must complete 2 biological sciences. Similar to the physical sciences requirement, there are different sequences available to you depending on what you think you might want to major in and what you are preparing for. Some science majors would like you to undertake particular biology course sequences. Other science majors may not have to take the traditional biology course, and they, along with those planning to pursue majors in the social sciences or humanities, might take biology for non-biologists or non-scientists.
For the art core requirement, students are introduced to methods for analyzing, comprehending, and appreciating works of musical or visual art. All students will complete 1 art course, and some will opt for 2. Did I cut out? Sorry. Zoom is fun. I'm back. There we are. So I'll just start from, there are many options to fulfill this requirement, and they are intended to be small classes that are introductory in nature. So no prior background or skills are needed for any core classes. One possible area to explore for art would be through the creative writing courses. These courses are multi-genre seminars that introduce students to various aesthetic, historical, and technical topics. Students approach the reading and production of literature from the writer's point of view through reading works, writing exercises, and class critiques. Now let's look at civilization studies, also known as Civ. There are more than 40 options for Civ originating in departments across campus. Civ provides an in-depth examination of the development and accomplishments of some of the world's great civilizations through direct encounters with significant and exemplary documents and monuments. Their approach stresses the grounding of events and ideas in historical context and the interplay of events, institutions, ideas, and cultural expressions in social change. Some sequences are chronological, but almost all of them incorporate material culture as a way of understanding time and place. We see this in East Asian civilizations with courses that span the ancient period to present day, or in gender and sexuality in World Civ, which focuses on the construction of sex and gender and looks at regulation of bodies. About half of our students complete Civ abroad through one of our many study abroad programs, and the other half complete courses on campus. Many find that an ideal time to go abroad for Civ is during the 3rd year of study, but Civ can be taken earlier.
The social science sequences, we offer 8 different sequences in all, are commonly known as SOSC. These sequences encourage students to explore a range of questions, such as, what is it? What do we mean by calling somebody an individual or a person? What is a culture, a mind, a community, or a society? What role does the economy play in shaping our lives? You will hear more about these sequences shortly from Professor Grant, but know that these year-long sequences share some common goals. In all of them, you will read important social scientific thinkers. Some sequences focus on classic texts, such as those written by Plato, Karl Marx, or John Locke. Others explore the approaches we commonly associate with quantitative analyses. All sequences explore how social scientists formulate questions and examine the dynamics of social life. Students typically take SOSC in the 1st or 2nd year, depending on the requirements and staging of their chosen majors. If you are not considering a pre-health or STEM major, you might prefer to take SOSC simultaneously this 1st year while taking humanities. Pre-health students and those pursuing a science major will commonly take SOSC in their 2nd year. I now turn it over to Professor Grant, Senior Lecturer and Co-Chair for the Classics of Social and Political Thought.
Hi, thanks, Elise. My name is Daragh Grant. I teach in Classics of Social and Political Thought in the core, and I'm delighted to join in welcoming you to the college at the University of Chicago. I should say I'm excited to talk to you about the core because you've all made a tremendously good decision to come to the University of Chicago. You're going to have an opportunity here to study the liberal arts in a way that is not really shared anymore by many of our peer institutions. And in as much as the liberal arts are about cultivating the skills and habits of mind necessary to be a free citizen, or a citizen rather in a free society, one of the benefits of SOSC is that you will learn the variety of ways in which people have thought about what that might entail, what a good life might look like across the history of social and political thought or in more contemporary contexts. So I'm going to just begin by sharing with you 2 broad aims of the core. Then I'm going to give you a sense of the landscape of the SOSC core, and then I'm going to come back to those 2 broad aims and sort of put a little more flesh on the bones. So broadly speaking, the SOSC core aims to do 2 things, irrespective of which SOSC you take. The first aim of the core is to introduce you to new styles of reasoning in the social sciences, enabling you to come to original insights of your own about the society that you live in, and to come to an understanding of the ideas and institutions that have shaped it, and that might reshape it if that is what you want to spend your life doing. Secondly, and arguably more fundamentally, what the core does is invites you to develop a set of foundational skills that will be crucial to you no matter what you do in college, no matter what major you take. We're going to teach you how to read closely and carefully. We're going to teach you how to develop your skills as writers, to now write new kinds of scholarly work that maybe is more expansive than the work that you have done to date. All of that is going to help you to develop your skills as a critical thinker. And because the core is taught in these small seminar classes, capped at 19 students, we're going to teach you how to engage with one another in conversation, how to work together collaboratively as part of a seminar group, and also how to listen to one another and to listen for the best version of what one another are saying. So I'll come back to those two aims in a second, but first I want to give you a sense of what the SOSC core looks like from sort of 30,000 feet. So there are, broadly speaking, two types of core, as Elise just alluded to. The first are a pair of core sequences that focus on maybe more quantitative or data-focused analysis. So in social science inquiry, you're going to focus on gathering, analyzing, and interpreting data relevant to contemporary public policy issues. There will be a variety of approaches depending on which sub-specialization of social science inquiry you take up. In the mind core, you're going to focus on the relationship between the individual and the society, but understood in a slightly different way than you might encounter that in, say, a political theory focused course. In particular, that sequence is going to introduce you to the relationship between our mental states and processes, so a sort of like biological account of the human, and the social contexts in which we operate. So how do our mental states and processes shape our social contexts, and how do those social contexts shape, in turn, our individual mental states and processes? So that's the first, say, subdivision of the core. The second subdivision are maybe what you think of when you think of I don't want to say great books, because that's not really the model that we operate with here, but a more text-focused, primary text-focused course. So there are, broadly speaking, 5 sequences that fit this bill. There are what you might call the big 3, the 3 older, more established core sequences at the University of Chicago: Self, Culture, and Society, Power, Identity, and Resistance, which Professor Spruill, who you met earlier, teaches in, and Classics of Social and Political Thought, which is where I do my core teaching. Alongside those 3 sequences are 2 newer sequences that are more thematically focused. So the first of those focuses on the history of democratic thought, again, from antiquity through to the present. And the second focuses on the history of religion and reads broadly across a wide array of religious traditions to think about the relationship between religion and society and the role that has played in shaping our conceptions of individual and society. Now, if those are the 2 broad buckets, there's one other core that spans those 2 approaches, and that's the global society core. So in the first quarter of global society, much like in Classics of Social and Political Thought, or PIR, you read texts, primary texts in the history of of social and political thought, broadly speaking, in the Western tradition. In the second 2 quarters of that sequence, however, the sequence turns towards more data analysis. So the second quarter focuses on demographic analysis, and the third quarter has a kind of project focus where you develop a piece of research of your own. So those are the 8 options that you can choose from. And no matter which of these options you choose, you're going to be extremely well served by the core at the University of Chicago. What I do want to do, though, is come back to these broad aims that I mentioned earlier. So firstly, it might seem odd to you that we want to teach you how to read and write and think. After all, we've admitted you to the University of Chicago. We know you can think already, and presumably we've been impressed by the way in which you write. However, one of the things about a university is we're going to start asking you to do things that you've never been asked to do before. We're going to ask you to take that incredible foundation that you've built for yourself and press it into the service of new tasks. So I'll give you an example of how this might look at the level of reading. So one of the things we're going to do in the SOSC core is to ask you to read slowly and carefully pieces of literature that are incredibly contestable and highly provocative. So in Classics of Social and Political Thought, we spend 8 of the 19 sessions in the fall quarter, 8 of the 18 sessions in the fall quarter, just reading Plato's Republic. So just reading one book. We're going to move really slowly through that argument. And you're going to be confronted in that argument by all sorts of lines of argument that you think are silly, or that you think are incredibly uncompelling, or even loathsome. And we're going to ask you to bracket that judgment, to step back a little bit from the reaction you have to the text, and to think how it is, nevertheless, that the author uses all of these lines of argument to construct a powerful and enduring account of political and social life, one that continues to be a touchstone for scholars studying politics and philosophy today. So we're going to ask you then to read for the best Plato, to read for the strongest version of the argument in front of you. Not because we want you to think it's a good argument or a persuasive argument or an argument that you like, but we want you to understand how the argument has had its effect, how Plato went about doing his work. And after you've done that, you can spend the rest of your life arguing with Plato, arguing against Plato, arguing for Plato, taking up that text in any number of a variety of ways. But you can only do that once you've learned to read it generously, carefully, and slowly. Second, one of the things we're going to ask you to do is learn to write in a more sustained and systematic way. So we're going to introduce you to new styles of argumentation in your writing that try to make use of writing as a tool for your thinking, as a way to advance your particular point of view, to develop your own analytical voice and your own perspective. And that's going to require you to maybe build on the ways in which you learned to write in high school, but loosen some of the frameworks of writing that you've been given and adopt new strategies for making an argument that's sustained around, across 1,000 or 2,000 words. That's going to be the kind of demand that we make of you. And that's going to help you to learn to think, because writing is a kind of thinking. It's not something we do when we've thought about Plato's Republic, decided where we are, and then want to write a paper about it. You'll learn that in the writing of your paper, your thinking is transformed. And we want to help you to develop a habit of writing that will enable you to get the most out of your own thinking. But perhaps most importantly for me are the ways in which you're going to learn to speak and listen to one another, to find your own voice in a classroom of your peers, to learn how to defend your point of view, but also how to listen for the best version of the argument your peers are making, so that you can build upon what they have said to construct a variety of interpretations of these incredible texts that we're going to read together with you. So those are the kinds of habits of mind that you're going to develop in the SOSC course that will be useful to you no matter what subject you go on to pursue. If you're an economist, or if you're a scientist of some kind, you still need to know how to write, and you still need to know how to work collaboratively and effectively with others. And so these are the kinds of habits that you're going to develop in our SOSC core classroom. But there is another thing that the SOSC core enables you to do, and that's to look at the society of which you are already a part in new and perhaps disturbing or destabilizing ways. That is to say, we're going to give you analytical tools to consider the society that you live in and call into question some of the things that you might have taken for granted about that society, or that you might simply never have thought about at all. So in the Power, Identity, and Resistance core sequence, that my colleague Professor Spruill teaches in, one of the things you're going to learn about is the variety of ways in which power operates in a society, how it operates in relationship to politics, how it operates in relationship to economics, how it operates in relationship to culture. These are the kinds of questions that you're going to be asked to pursue, and that's going to invite you to then consider again in different ways the society in which you live. Or in my sequence, Classics of Social and Political Thought, going all the way back to Plato and reading across a tradition of responses and critiques and challenges to the arguments laid down in ancient Athens, we might ask a question like, what does it mean to live a good and distinctively human life? How have people changed their minds about what it was to live that kind of life? How do we deal with or reckon with the sort of challenging and sometimes unseemly ways in which people have thought about that idea in the past? And then how, when we come to Du Bois's The Souls of Black Folks, a book written in the United States at the start of the 20th century, or Simone de Beauvoir's The Second Sex, how do these traditions continue to enable us to challenge the ways in which we have come to operate in our society, the kinds of institutions we have constructed, or the kinds of ideas we have decided to cling to? And in all of those texts, what you're going to encounter are ideas that are sometimes uncomfortable, sometimes disagreeable, but ideas that reckoning with will enable you to come to a new view about how our society operates and how maybe it ought to operate if we are indeed to live a good and distinctively human life. So I look forward at the end of this webinar to addressing any questions that you might have about the SOSC core, but for now I'm going to hand things back to Elise.
Thank you very much, Daragh. We'll have you join us, as you've said, at the end. Our final core requirement that we're going to talk about today is the humanities requirement. And we are joined here by Professor Eric Slauter, who's Deputy Dean of the Humanities Division and Master the Humanities Collegiate Division. Before he begins, we just want to share with you some basics. Humanities courses are about ways of thinking and engaging with a variety of texts, including literary, historical, and philosophical texts. They're not surveys courses, just as you've heard about SOSC core. They work instead to establish methods for appreciating and analyzing the meaning and power of exemplary texts. So with that, Eric, I turn it over to you.
Thanks so much, Elise. It's a pleasure to welcome you all to the University of Chicago and to have a chance to talk with you about the humanities core. Here at the university, we see the humanities as a foundation for higher education and as central to the culture, the special culture of inquiry that we try to promote across the disciplines here. That's why the one curricular experience that you will share for all first-year students and all second-year transfer students will be an experience in the humanities core. Now, the humanities is a vast area, and Chicago humanists study the past, they describe the present, and they imagine the future. We believe that the big issues of our day have humanistic dimensions. That, for instance, the rise of artificial intelligence compels us to reconsider what we mean and have meant by thought or cognition. That our climate and energy problems require changes not simply in science, but in thinking and acting, in understanding and belief. And that global problems require people fluent in the languages, cultures, and traditions of others. My colleagues in the humanities, your future teachers, include philosophers and linguists, experts on the languages, literatures, histories, cultures, and civilizations of the world, art historians, film scholars, ethnomusicologists, and media theorists, as well as arts practitioners of all kinds, from sculptors and painters in visual arts, to composers in performance and music, to choreographers and directors in theater and performance studies, to novelists and poets in creative writing, or filmmakers and game makers in media arts and design. The humanities core can be your gateway into these disciplines, and I hope you'll explore some of the wonderful courses offered in our departments and programs, including some of our interdisciplinary majors in the Humanities Collegiate Division, such as Fundamentals, Issues, and Texts, a program where students pursue an important question of their own design, or Cognitive Science, a program that connects philosophy and linguistics in the humanities with psychology, computer science, and neuroscience. But even if the humanities core will be your only coursework, the only coursework you do here in the humanities, it will still serve as your invitation into the special scholarly community of the university as a whole, a place to cultivate the essential habits of mind and inquiry we promote: reading closely, asking hard questions, critically evaluating evidence, listening to what others have to say, practicing open-mindedness, and learning to express yourself in writing, not just freely, but well. This is the goal of the humanities core. We limit the size of these classes, capping each of them at 19 students to promote good discussions. But that's not how we've always done it. We used to prefer a different model for the core. We'd assemble the entire first-year class together in Mandel Hall over in Reynolds Club, and then have a rotating series of specialists, experts, lecture to them, or rather lecture at them. And then at the end of the year, we'd give all of those students a comprehensive exam. Yes, roughly a century ago, that's what we did. And versions of that model exist for the humanities and for other disciplines at other schools. Not just exist, they thrive, for lecturing is an age-old method of delivering instruction. But for the better part of the last century, we've been committed to a different model for delivering instruction in the humanities core, and to a different idea of what instruction itself might mean. Lecturing by experts has a place, of course, but it is not a particularly effective way to deliver the kind of experience that we want our students to have in the humanities core. We believe that students learn more in small group discussions led by scholars who are experts in some way, but by no means always, and who are on hand not to explain to students their own hard-won scholarly interpretations of this or that work of art, literature, philosophy, or historical event, but to help students confront firsthand what it means to try to see the world with a particular habit of mind, how to approach a philosophical text, and to learn to ask questions with the curiosity and rigor of a philosopher, how to look closely with the eye of an artist or an art historian, or to listen with the ear of a poet or literary scholar, and how to approach a problem from a historian's perspective. And of course, we want you to learn how to write clearly, which means how to reconstruct another person's argument, how to make your own in the most compelling and persuasive way possible. In other words, these are seminars where active learning happens. They are meant to help you learn how to think. They're not courses in which an expert tells you what to think or what the right interpretation of a particular text is. Now, I haven't said anything yet about the kinds of texts you'll read. Alumni recall fondly the books they've read as first-year students in the Humanities Corps. They often keep those texts and reread them. I know because they write to me to tell me how important the experience of the Corps was to them, no matter what else they chose to study here or what path their careers ultimately took. But those books are in some sense secondary for the Corps. Our Corps is flexible and changing, and the texts in your sequence will inevitably contain a mix of philosophy, literature, art, film, media, and performance. We don't have a unitary Corps where all students are reading the same thing the same week. Columbia University in New York has long had that kind of Corps, and students in literature humanities at the beginning of each year since the 1950s read the Chicago University Press translation of the Iliad. Stanford has recently adopted a new Corps of its own called Civic, Liberal, and Global Education, or college, that all first-year students take with a common set of readings. An optional reading for that course, by the way, is the 2014 report of the Committee on Freedom of Expression, the Chicago Principles. We haven't had that kind of unitary Corps since 1965. We want students to have similar experiences in their core classes, but since the 1960s, we have had variants or sequences, introducing a high degree of choice into the general education curriculum. We invite students to choose from 8 different humanities sequences, to choose courses in the Arts Corps from 7 different departments and programs, and to gain language competency in one of the over 50 different languages offered each year, including many lesser taught languages, from Akkadian to Yiddish. We currently have 8 choices in the Humanities Corps, which means that at any one point in the year, 8 different texts are being engaged by our students. To give you a sense, consider what's being read and discussed in the 4th week of winter at the very center of the Corps. Students in our media aesthetics sequence are considering the relation of speech and writing in Plato's Phaedrus. Students in Human Being and Citizen are transitioning from Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics to Augustine's Confessions. And students in Philosophical Perspectives are dwelling on Descartes. Students in Greece and Rome, having explored classical ideas of tragedy, are now discussing Shakespeare's Hamlet. Students in Reading Cultures are juxtaposing Homer's Odyssey with Harriet Jacobs' Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl. Students in Readings in World Literature are considering autobiography and discussing The Pillow Book, written by Sei Sonogong, a court lady to a Japanese empress, composed about the year 1002. Meanwhile, students in Poetry and the Human are reading works by contemporary poets from the Middle East and North Africa, and students in Language and the Human are discussing bilingualism and considering Richard Rodriguez's Hunger of Memory. This variety, spanning the 8th century BCE to the present and involving texts written in Asia, the Americas, Europe, and Africa, is characteristic of our approach to the Corps. The sequences each have their own themes and topics and texts. Human Being and Citizen focuses on issues of justice and the law, on leadership and friendship, on the self and community, and on what constitutes the good. Philosophical Perspectives taps the history of philosophy to explore ongoing arguments over the place of humans in the world, as well as the relation of philosophy to other disciplines, including science, literature, religion, and law. Reading Cultures addresses topics of collection, travel, and exchange, addressing questions of memory, home, and belonging, the politics and poetics of storytelling, the legacies of colonialism, and the relation of economic development to cultural transformation. Readings in World Literature, with a focus on grand epic and personal autobiography, addresses ideas about cultural value and social hierarchy, but also about individuality, death, power, and sexuality. Greece and Rome focuses on creation and reception, the transformation and contestation of traditions of the epic, the tragic, and the comic over both space and time. Poetry in the Human examines the important role poetry plays and has played in society in relation to memory, performance, storytelling, history, ritual, creation, and knowledge formation. Media Aesthetics treats images, texts, and sounds, exploring seeing, reading, and listening, and the philosophical and methodological questions raised by trying to understand the effects of these media and of the idea of representation itself more generally. Language in the Human is inflected by linguistics, philosophy, and neuroscience, and explores the role of language in power, identity, and thought. How does language influence how we think about race, gender, sexual orientation, and species? How does language motivate us to act? Despite the variety of approaches and questions, the sequences share a commitment to welcoming students into some of the biggest issues and questions of our time. What is justice? What is creativity? How does language shape our assumptions and beliefs? How can we represent experience? What is interpretation? How are different disciplines connected? And what does it mean to be human? We treat writing as a form of thinking, and all of our sequences currently include attached writing seminars led by dedicated writing specialists. We take a reader-centered approach to writing. We want you to learn how to make compelling claims, how to motivate your readers, how to anticipate their doubts, and how to shape arguments to persuade a target audience. In short, how to express yourself clearly and effectively. In the past few years, we have drawn on more of our campus to help our students experience the humanities core in innovative ways. Our Smart to the Core program at the Smart Museum on campus allows humanities and social science core courses the chance to work closely with artworks of all kinds, providing dedicated exhibitions and programs with visiting artists, in essence, turning the museum into a classroom. Students in certain sections reading Gilgamesh have the opportunity to see parts of that epic inscribed on 3,500-year-old cuneiform tablets at the Institute for the Study of Ancient Cultures. A program at the Tony Award-winning Court Theater enables humanities core students to experience productions of classic plays. They saw Antigone this year, and the chance to go behind the scenes to speak with directors and performers about their work and their interpretive choices. More and more of the sections of the core are visiting the Hannah Holborn Gray Special Collections Research Center at the Regenstein Library, a place that is very dear to my heart. Indeed, 2 years ago, I made the decision to locate my section of Human Being and Citizen in our Special Collections classroom, which meant that the students and I were able to see a range of materials every day. We examined a 2,000-year-old papyrus fragment of the Iliad, as well as translations made in Spain in the 16th century, in Russia in the 18th century, and in China in the 20th century. We leafed through a copy of Plato's works made in the 1570s, a work of Renaissance humanism that entered our library in 1891, before any students arrived. We saw one of the first public printings of the Declaration of Independence made in Philadelphia on July 8, 1776, and a copy of the Emancipation Proclamation signed by Abraham Lincoln, as well as posters made by students in our own college for Martin Luther King Jr.'s lecture in Mandel Hall in 1966, and much, much more. There's so much to explore here at the university, and the instructors in the Humanities Core and I are excited for you to start exploring in the autumn quarter. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eric. Again, we'll have you join us toward the end of Q&A. Now that we have a fuller sense of the core requirements, the SOSC core, the Humanities Core, my colleague Shana will briefly lay out for you how you're going to go about submitting your rankings and requesting your humanities course sequence next week.
Thanks, Elise. So selecting your preferences for the humanities sequence is the first step schedule for autumn. You will pre-register for the remainder of your schedule in August. This past Monday, you were added to the Academic Advising Canvas course, and once you log in, sorry, cut out again. But once you log in to the Canvas course, you will see guided content with step-by-step instructions on how to submit your registration preferences. You will review information about each of the 8 humanities options so that you can make the most informed decisions. As you review the options, you will want to keep track of your top picks, as you will be ranking all 8 options from top choice to last choice. Then starting next week, you will log into your My U Chicago portal and rank them in the computer system. So when you're in Canvas, you will be able to review the course descriptions for each humanities option. There will be short clips where faculty members will describe the sequence, and you can see example syllabi with sample readings and types of assignments you might encounter for each option. You'll have access to a step-by-step video and written instructions for the registration rankings, and we have more information about each core requirement, so you can start to think about which may be of interest in the autumn in addition to your humanities course. And that leads us to the end of our presentation. We covered a lot of information. Many questions you have will be specific to your interests and plans, so we'll try to avoid, going too in-depth on situational questions. Your academic advisor will be the person to ask all of your individual questions. So, Steph, what questions do we have?
Thanks, Sheena. And I think, did we have one more slide about some upcoming information as well?
We do.
You wanted to share?
Yeah, so this is just some reminders about upcoming events and deadlines that we have in the coming weeks. So next week will be the time that you submit the rankings. The placement exams are due on the 20th, and we are hoping that you all will request your AP and IB scores be sent by that day as well. And then there are some individual webinars for the core math, chemistry, physics, computer science, more of the STEM fields will be hosting webinars later this summer. So check out CPO's webinar link to get registered for that.
Great, thank you, Shayna. So again, we want to encourage, I've been answering a lot of questions in the chat, but encouraging you to please send those in as well. And again, taking advantage of our opportunity here to discuss live with 2 of our esteemed faculty members here. So a really basic, but a really important question for you, Eric and Daragh. This is the first time a lot of our students are even experiencing this idea of a sequence. So there's also been inquiry into what is a sequence, and specifically for the 2 of you having the way each of yours are structured, what the importance is of that format.
Yeah, I'm happy to take I'm a historian, so I answer most questions like this from a historical standpoint. At one point in time in the 1930s through the 1960s, we had a series of core requirements. So students took a single humanities year-long sequence. It was unitary. Afterwards, in the 1960s, we developed variants, allowing for this kind of choice between the sequences. But for the humanities core, students in their first year, or transfer students, are going to be expected to enroll in at least 2 quarters. So the fall and winter quarters of the humanities core, they will stay in the same sequence. They will typically stay within the same section, meaning that the relationships you build with those 18 other students are going to continue on, at least for 1 quarter, in some cases for the full year.
Yeah, and so in social, what a sequence means sort of depends. So in classics of social and political thought, not to say we take it literally, but it really is a sequence. So we start in antiquity and we move historically across the sequence. The first quarter is basically ancient and medieval thought. The middle quarter is the social contract tradition, so really the 17th, 18th century, and then the spring quarter is the 19th and 20th centuries. In other core sequences, they take a more thematic approach. So the fall quarter of Professor Spruill's sequence, for instance, focuses on the same social contract tradition that we in classics read in the winter. So it's That's their study of power as a dimension of politics. In the winter quarter, they turn to works of classical political economy. So they begin with Adam Smith and they read through a bunch of different Marx texts and then into more contemporary economic theory. And then in the spring, they deal with more cultural issues. Similarly, self-culture and society it used to be structured sort of slightly differently, that mapped a little more closely to each of those terms, but it has a sort of thematic focus of each quarter, and those focuses sort of build upon one another as the year goes on. But different cores take the sequential aspect of their sequences differently. They oftentimes will read the same texts, but pursuing a slightly different purpose to each of those texts. So each core sequence has its own sort of identity to it. But in all of those cases, the quarters are interrelated to one another and build upon one another in an effective way to pursue whatever the themes of that particular core are.
Thank you both. Another question, I have a specific question from a transfer student, and I think we can even open it up more broadly. So this is a transfer student asking about taking the humanities sequence with social sciences within that first year at UChicago. And then I think more broadly, to open it up, what type of students should be considering taking your two sequences simultaneously?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've frequently had second year transfer students in my humanities core sections. They are often doing both the humanities and the social sciences. The core that I teach right now, Human Being and Citizen, as you could perhaps hear in its title, used to be a double core. It had sections in the humanities and sections in the social sciences, and students enrolled in 6 hours of that every week. We haven't had that kind of alignment in quite a long time, and my understanding is now about a third of most first-year students are involved in some way in the social sciences core, but perhaps Daragh can address that.
So I think that's right. It's about somewhere between a quarter and a third, I think. So I will say I have very strong personal views on this question, which I don't necessarily want to impose on you. But to get to when I see students who are simultaneously in Hume and Soc, those students are oftentimes really moved by this material. Like this is something they have wanted to study since they were 12 years old, and they're finally getting their opportunity, and they're gobbling it all up at once, and it's going to provide a great foundation for them for their time in the college. Students who want to, as Elise mentioned earlier, who want to spread their requirements across 2 years often are doing so because their particular desired major requires them to take certain classes early, so they just don't have room for Soc in their schedule at the time. To my mind, some of those students might benefit from that experience. And one way in which they benefit is if you take Hume and Soc not at the same time, but in sequence, that means you get 5 to 6 quarters of writing instruction. So you get a really long time to develop your skills as a writer. So if developing your skills as a writer is really important to you, that can be one way in which you leverage the core to get greater exposure to that. I had a student a couple of years ago who's a computer science major, went off to a great job in fintech after he graduated, but was also really passionate about creative writing and used the core to build up his writing skills, and then turned to the arts core as a place to further develop that passion in creative writing. So, one of the things I would suggest to you is think about the long game where the core is concerned. Like, you don't have to study all of the Plato at once. You can actually spread that out across the 4 years you spend in the college. Indeed, you can study Plato for a whole lifetime. So, you don't have to do it all at once. But for some of you, I understand that really getting a foundation in the social sciences at the same time as you're getting your foundation in the humanities is just going to be important to the plan you have in the college. But so I think that it can go either way, and it really depends on what any individual student feels they need in terms of skill development early on, as opposed to over the long term.
And we had an important question came in that I had just responded to that I did want to highlight. For both Hume and Soc, yes, to begin these sequences, you do need to start in autumn. You cannot join these mid-year. So these are important conversations to have with your academic advisor as well when you meet later this summer. We have a particularly interesting question, and I'm so interested to hear both of your responses. How often is your opinion, you, the professor, your mind changed by a student in a core class discussion?
Frequently. Frequently. I mean, I will say, I've come around to the core. When I first arrived here almost 25 years ago, I had just finished a dissertation about the cultural origins of the US Constitution. I had spent 3 years thinking very hard about the 1780s and especially the year 1787. And so when I was asked, what would I like to teach in the core, I said, the course that has the most alignment with the year 1787. And the person in my office at that time kind of laughed and said, that's not how the core works. All of us stretch in some way. And the point is not to be an expert in all of these texts. In fact, it's quite impossible. As Daragh was saying, we have courses in philosophical perspectives where you're going from ancient to contemporary. We have courses in multiple genres, multiple media. And so there's no chance, I think, that anyone is going to be a specialist and have a level of expertise. And that's really not the point of having that person in the front of the room. So I am frequently surprised by the kinds of interpretations and the kinds of things that my students notice. They can be students from anywhere in the college. They could be in molecular engineering and think very closely about certain motifs or be very good at recognizing certain kinds of patterning in a work of literature in a way that I myself had not seen. So I think these classes are meant to be conversations, and students who get excited about Plato or the Iliad or something like that can go and take another course with somebody whose specialty is in that, or they can come and take a course on the Declaration of Independence or the Constitution with me. But yes, I mean, I do feel constantly, I mean, the core is a kind of challenge to one's ego, I think. I've been, again, constantly challenged and surprised by what the participants, I want to call them my students, but they're fellow participants in this experience have taught me.
Yeah, so I would want to pick up on one thing that Eric just mentioned. So, when you say how often has a student changed my mind, I don't know if it's about change. I don't know if I would put it in quite that way. So have students illuminated the text for me in ways that I had never considered before? Absolutely. They've enabled me to see things that I hadn't seen. And that's because these texts that we read, if I can use a pompous word, are like polysemic. They can mean lots of things. This precise meaning of what Plato was up to or what Thomas Hobbes was up to or what Karl Marx was up to isn't self-evident. That the text can be pressed into the service of lots of different kinds of arguments, and that's because it's open to our interpretation. And one of the joys of teaching students who come from such a wide array of intellectual backgrounds, these are students who are like, extraordinary mathematicians or physicists or biologists or people who want to go on to be doctors or people who want to study English literature or philosophy or economics. They come with all of these different presuppositions, all of these different backgrounds, all of these different ways of seeing the world. And when they encounter these texts that are open to interpretation, they encounter them in ways that I don't. And they therefore come up with interpretations that aren't my interpretations. Do I agree with all of those interpretations? Do I think all of them can be sustained? No, and that's what we argue about in class. A student will make a suggestion and I might push back, but is it possible for me to be convinced that there really is this available interpretation? Absolutely, it happens every year.
A couple more sequence related questions here. From your perspectives and both experiences, what should students expect for an average workload per week? Just generally, perhaps across HUME and SOC.
I mean, it can feel very intense depending on the week. You know, if you've never encountered a work of philosophy, and that can be very common for students coming from high school, it was certainly true for me. It takes a long time to read a very short piece. And, you know, part of what the core is helping you to do is to slow down and to try to absorb as much as you can in the amount of time. So I hesitate to give students exact, you know, exact hours. You know, typically I would say probably one wants to give about a day a week to the reading of the texts in the humanities core, or the viewing of them, or the listening to them in order to come sort of ready to talk and discuss. It won't be the same every week, and there are papers and other kinds of things that will come in that will affect the amount of reading week to week. But you know, I think I would say probably a day for the humanities core. I don't know, Daragh, what is your rule of thumb here?
Yeah, so I'm also similarly hesitant to put a number on it. Like, some of you are going to read these texts and you're just going to get lost in them, and you're going to read them over and over and over again because you're going to be moved to do that. Some of you are going to get through your reading that little bit quicker because maybe this doesn't grip you quite as much, or maybe it's only after class that you really see why it was that you should have spent a little more time on this reading. So how much each of you is going to spend each week, that's, you know, that is going to be very much dependent on your commitment to the class and the way in which the class grips you. And I will say that I think that the workload, the main unevenness that I would register in the workload is going to be around the writing assignments. So, you know, in classics of social and political thought, or PIR, or self, you're going to probably write 2 essays per quarter. And those 2 essays are going to, you know, they're going to be due on specific due dates. And the lead up time is going to be maybe 2 to 3 weeks. And in those weeks, you're going to be spending a little more time, you know, going back to the text that you're writing an essay about, drafting your paper, redrafting it, coming up with an outline after you've drafted it, deciding whether or not you think that outline really sort of meets the argument that you're trying to make, and maybe putting the final and finishing touches on it. During those weeks, you're going to be spending more time on the SOSC core than you would be, you know, in a week when your primary assignment is just the reading. And then that's going to vary depending on what we're asking you to read that week. So, you know, in my case, with Plato's Republic, you're probably going to have 20 pages per class to read. So it's a pretty small amount of reading for each class session. But sometimes you might want to do that reading more than once, because you might be so puzzled by it the first time that you decide you want to return to it before the class discussion. And again, I think that you shouldn't expect SOSC core or HUME core, at least in my experience, to take you any more time than any other course that you're taking. But you also shouldn't expect it to take much less. Like, these really are foundational courses that are going to take you about as much time as you should imagine, you know, calculus to take, or a physics course to take.
If I could maybe just inflect a bit of what you've said, maybe our students would like to hear from each of you about the ways you observe your own reading processes have changed over the course of your lives as scholars. That maybe back in high school you thought about a reading in particular ways, and how have you seen your reading change when you have to sit down and think about what you want to write or what you're preparing for class? Do you approach it differently now than, say, you might have 10 years ago? So tell people a little bit about the fullness, the full array of ways, I guess I would say, in which one might read. And take notes to prepare?
So maybe I'll start on this because I think I might maybe have a more unconventional story to tell. So I studied, firstly, I did my undergraduate degree in the United Kingdom. So it's a very, very different model, much more the model that Eric was describing of being lectured at and, you know, taking an exam at the end of the year. And that was a sort of sink or swim occasion. And I always tell my students, I wrote one paper in college. It was a paper on demographic analysis in a class that I only took because it was supposed to be an easy class. It was also arguably the most unrewarding class I took in college, but that wasn't because I had to write a paper in it. So, you know, I did an undergraduate degree where I didn't do any reading. I didn't do the kinds of things that you're going to get to do in the core. And it's one of the reasons why getting to teach in the core is such an extraordinary experience for me, because I get to see what I didn't have, and I get to watch you benefit from these like incredible array of subjects that you get to study, from the sciences through math to the humanities and the social sciences, and the kinds of ways that it allows you to cultivate not only your skills as a reader, but a variety of different skills as a reader, reading in different genres and for different purposes and with different aims in mind. So in one sense, I learned how to read, properly speaking, not only as a graduate student here at the University of Chicago, but really most foundationally as an instructor in the core. I came to the core without much background in the material we were discussing, more background in the sort of middle period, so the sort of 17th, 18th century period. And I learned to read a variety of different texts and to convey in conversation with students both my interpretations of those texts, but also the sort of openness of those interpretations and the limitations of my own interpretations of the text. And that was partly because I learned how to do that alongside engaged and committed students who were developing their skills as readers at the same time. Like, I will say that I'm very bad at remembering the specifics of texts from one year to the next. So I do the reading every year. And I will say, I think I generally take more time doing the reading every year than my students take. And that is, you know, maybe as it should be. But every year I get to turn back to these texts. And it's like, you know, the way I describe it to my students is it's like food for the soul. Like, there's just no better thing to get to sort of think with and chew on and digest than these extraordinary works, beguiling works, oftentimes really challenging works of social and political thought that I get to sort of think with my students about. But, you know, to go to Elise's question, as a college student or as a high school student or as a person in his early 20s working as an investment banker for my sins, I didn't know how to read yet. And really, it took learning how to teach this material and how to think with this material alongside students to really cultivate a sensibility around reading that I now cherish and feel like I'm the beneficiary.
Yeah, I've already suggested a little bit of my own experience, which was, you know, what felt like an acceleration in college. I remember in high school, you know, it taking 10 weeks to read a novel and then being asked to read, you know, a novel a week or something like that when I got to college. So that general acceleration. I tend to think of this in, I guess, two ways, in part because I have studied a little bit the history of reading, at least in the 17th, 18th, 19th century. And one theory has it that, you know, in the early modern period, people read intensively. They had only a very few access to a very few small number of books, let's say the Bible, for instance, and they read them incredibly closely, incorporating them into their sort of daily lives in a way. And that around 1800, people start to read extensively. They have you know, access to more and more books, and so they're reading just not as intensively as they had been before, a more shallow version of that. And I don't know that theory is completely true. I think it's quite contestable, actually. But I think those two modes, intensive reading and extensive reading, are things that you can get out of your experience here at the university. So I teach courses in that program that I mentioned earlier, Fundamentals, Issues in Text, which was designed by students who had been in the college in the 1950s and 60s, back when you could start the University of Chicago at about age 15 or 16 and graduate at the age of 19. And these alums had gone on to earn PhDs, and they looked back on their core experience with great pleasure and thought, well, why read 6 books across 10 weeks in the core when you might spend your entire college reading 6 books and reading them intensively, mastering the scholarship behind them, posing a personal question that motivates your reading of them, learning the languages in which they're written in, and really, making them a part of your life. So I teach courses within that program. I taught one this year on the Declaration of Independence, which looks at the ways in which that particular document came to be, but also the ways in which readers and subsequent writers have transformed it over time in the interpretive tradition. I'm teaching one next year with a colleague from history on Tocqueville's Democracy in America. Well, we'll just slow read that one book for the quarter, which is not a short book by any means, but it'll give us a chance, from my point of view, to look at some of the things that Tocqueville read when he was preparing to write that book, things he was handed when he was in the United States. And then my colleague will be looking at the ways in which Tocqueville has been read over time. And so it's a chance to think both about this classic work, but also about, its sources and the ways in which it has affected other people's arguments. And I think, my hope is that you will learn to read in both of those modes when you're here, that you will learn to read intensively and closely, pausing frequently, and that you'll also become familiar with a lot of different kinds of texts, even texts you thought you would have no interest in coming out of high school. So that's what I'll say to that.
Thank you so much, Eric and Nara. We've responded to 80 questions in the chat here today, so we've tried to get to as many as possible. We have maybe one final one that kind of feels like maybe the perfect one to end on for both of you, and that relates to accessibility of professors. So there's a question of will they have time to have conversations with students outside of class, and maybe just generally the culture of U Chicago and accessibility of our academics to engage with our students?
So yes, I would say professors are busier than you might think. So they're not only teaching classes, but they're engaged in their own research, and they have a bunch of administrative responsibilities that they have to take care of. But every single core instructor will be holding weekly office hours for their students to come to. And in my experience, every instructor is happy for a student to talk about the text in the class, but also to talk about really other things that are related to the students' intellectual interests and the ways in which they cross over with the themes of the course. So I would say that you will always have the opportunity to meet and talk with your professor if you wish. Different professors have more sort of bandwidth or flexibility in their time to speak with students than others, but I don't think any instructor in the core is going to be uninterested or unwilling to meet with you and talk about your interests.
Yeah, I'll just second that. I mean, I think, all of us are holding regular scheduled office hours that might be drop in or by appointment, because we know that your own schedules are very tight often, especially in the first year. I think a lot of us have flexibility where we can meet you at alternate times or meet you over Zoom early in the morning or meet you at a time that's convenient to you. I regularly, just as this session has gone over, I regularly, will hang out after my core course or my courses in special collections when the materials are still out. So that's a chance to sort of look a little bit more closely at them or talk things through. But you should feel empowered to make an appointment to come talk to your your instructor. I think we all, want to get to know you. I think the scale of the core especially encourages that, that if you are in a sequence where your instructor stays with you for multiple quarters, that's a great person who can, end up writing letters of recommendation, who really has a sense of your intellectual promise and commitments, and has seen development over time. So often, I think, no matter what you end up doing, you will form a kind of bond with your, especially with your first year humanities core instructor. But yes, absolutely, seek us out. And, I'm sitting here in my my administrative office, and I'm not teaching in the fall, but, any of you who would like to drop by Harper Memorial Library, room 230, set up an appointment or something like that, I'd be very happy to talk with you and hear about your experiences in the humanities core.
Awesome. Well, I think that will conclude our webinar today. Thank you all for joining us. This webinar was recorded, and the link to watch the recording will be posted on to the summer webinar series section of the orientation website by the end of the week. So thank you, and we look forward to seeing you at our next webinar.
Thank you to all of our panelists for being here. Have a good one.